Today we're going to be talking about site speed, everyone's favorite topic, and certainly one that Google has made us all become much more familiar with over the past few years. For those that don't know, or for those that weren't joining on Thursday whenever I did our first one of these classes, I am Tyler Bishop. I'm the CMO here at Ezoic. I helped start Google's Pubtelligence, a global event for publishers, hosted at Google offices around the world. I've served as an SEO expert, digital expert for startup competitions, mainly helping them look at their marketing and reach strategies online, and being able to offer insights around what is effective and what isn't effective for growing web traffic. And I am also the host of the Publisher Lab, a weekly podcast about digital publishing and the latest news. So I'm always staying up to date on whatever it is we're reading about in the latest journals or publications. So I'm also a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, semi-retired magician. And if you hear any barks in the background, it's because I'm like a lot of you. I'm working from home right now during the coronavirus pandemic. And so I do have two small Shiba Inus, one of which is very quiet and the other which is not. So if you do happen to hear a dog in the background, that's what's going on. So I guess I'll just briefly, some housekeeping items. One of the things that always comes into play is, are we going to record this? Will we make these resources available? The answer is yes. We are recording it, so anyone that signed up is going to be sent this recording automatically. It's also available on ezoic.com/ezoic-education. That's where you can actually access all these courses. And then it's also on our YouTube channel. It'll be up probably maybe a day after this is actually broadcast. So if you want to view these other courses, ezoic.com/ezoic-education, and then the recordings are ezoic-education-courses. So hopefully that's all easy to find. It's also a service alert in your dashboard. So if you log into your Ezoic account, it should be easy to find at the top. So tomorrow we've got a really, really good course on how to evaluate writers and how to basically figure out what the ROI of your content is and what specific writers are generating. So we've got a decent amount of publishers that use this information to pay their writers to ensure that they're basically continuing to crank out content in a way that's affordable to them. So I highly recommend that. And then on Wednesday, we have a special guest, Doug Cunnington on here. It's a really, really good course that he has where he's going to be sharing largely some Q&A on the secrets that he has for growing niche sites. And he has a YouTube channel called Niche Site Project that some of you may be familiar with, and we'll have Doug on to share some insights on Wednesday. And so I'm going to get into some of these. I see one question in here from Brian already, and that will be something that I address here in just a little bit. That should be able to answer that question, Brian. So I'm going to start by pointing out this site. So this is one of my sites that I own. We beat it up a lot for different testing purposes, mainly in marketing. But in this case, I wanted to use it as an example as we go through different features and optimizations that we do with Ezoic. So I actually had to take it ahead of time because there was a couple changes that I had to make that were going to take a little bit of time to propagate. So this is the site earlier today, page speed insight site score of 31 on mobile. And so I'm going to go in a little bit deeper into some of the things we're going to do, and we're going to look at what changes can be made and what impact they have. So generally, when we're measuring site speed right now, what we see a lot of is the use of tools. So a mixture of both Google Page Speed Insights, a mixture of Chrome's UX tool, and a mixture of these new metrics that we got from Search Console, which are these Web Core Vitals. And they're all different. So yay, thanks, Google. So a good example of this is we've got the Page Speed Insight score, which offers certain suggestions around optimizing your site for speed according to Google. Then if you look at Search Console previously, prior to the Web Core Vitals, you would get information that was based solely on the Chrome UX report, crux data as they call it. And this information was extracted from the last 30 days of was supposed to be actual user data. It's a sampling, but it would include stuff like any slow 2G users that were on your site, even if there were very, very few, maybe even just one. They would look at that information. They would give you these slow, moderate, fast, and they would completely differ from page speed insights. And now what we're seeing is with the Web Core Vitals that Google is finding a better correlation between page speed insights and what you're seeing in Search Console. However, the recommendations often work against each other. So we're going to get into that a little bit as well. How to basically optimize for the user and make your sites faster and try to make Google as happy as you can, knowing full well that you're going to make them unhappy in some capacity because it's impossible to actually do two of the things that they're asking for at the same time. So one of the biggest problems with tools that I see, and why I think this is such a hot topic at the moment, well, there's a couple of reasons, but I think one of the biggest ones is that all the tools that people use, many are different. People have their favorites for various reasons, but the tools largely grab everything. So, I mean, this GT metrics, for example, has some good information that you can't get other places, but it also offers a lot of insights that are completely unrelated to speed. It offers things that it thinks are good for SEO, which are in some cases outdated, depending on who you ask, and not really relevant to speed at all. So beyond that, even with page speed insights, the recommendations that are given to websites are usually pretty broadly focused. Things like eliminate render blocking JavaScript above the fold. If you're not a developer or you're not a coder by trade, that may sound like a completely foreign concept to you, and you might say, well, that's great. I'd love to be able to do that, but I'm not really sure how to do it on my website. And in fact, many of the recommendations that I was talking about before will actually make your website slower. So ultimately, tools are not the best way to measure UX or speed. One of my favorite examples for this is CNN.com. So CNN.com, if you go to it on your mobile device, no matter where you're at, tethering, not mobile tethering, you'll find that it's a very fast, snappy experience, really good. However, PageSpeed Insights gives it a 0 on mobile. So not the best, but it's actually pretty fast. They actually have been on record before saying they don't care very much about what their page speed reports are because they've spent a lot of time. They actually have one person on their team solely developed or solely dedicated to website speed. And yeah, they said they specifically don't care about Google Page Speed Insights. But I know that that's not the case for many of you. So I will share with you at least this, which I always think is fun. This was CNN.com. And you can see very, very fast loading. And it's just one of the things I like to point out just because it just highlights why tools are, I would say, a cautionary device for pure measurement. And they're non-personalized. So this is Injury Health Blog. One of the things that I wanted to do here was implement some of all the different things that were told to me to do inside of GT metrics. And unfortunately, if I do everything, it makes my site look like this. So that's the challenge with a lot of these things is many of the recommendations will often break your sites, and a lot of the tools used to implement them are either expensive or not really effective for your website. And the worst thing you can do is pay for something that ultimately is not effective or helpful to your website. So I guess before we even go past, what can you do? What specifically can you do with Ezoic, with other things? I want to explain a couple things about the metrics themselves, because in some instances, you're going to have to make a choice what you want to optimize for in terms of speed. There's always going to be trade-offs, but even with speed, when optimizing for one speed metric versus another, you're likely to negatively impact one. So my best example of this is average page load time, which actually still displays inside of Google Analytics. You don't see it inside of most tools anymore. Some will show it, but average page load time is a really good example of probably one of the most meaningless speed metrics there are. And the reason for that is because when a site is done loading in the browser, there are many best practices that can be missed if you optimize to make that as quick as possible. A good example is lazy loading things down the page. Realistically, until someone is done reading an article and loading that last image, the page is not fully loaded because it's still an image that's been either deferred or it's loading down the page. So I'll kind of touch on that a little bit more in a minute. So you've got average page load time, and then you have all of these metrics here that Google has. Some of these are kind of industry standard ones, but a lot of them are ones that Google has made up that are sort of their spin on a previously established performance metric. So you can see things like first contentful page, time to interactive, also known as DOM interactive, total blocking time, speed index score, largest contentful paint, CLS, cumulative layout shift. That's a hard one. Most of these are new in the last few weeks from Google, and so you might ask, like, what are the recommendations that Google has for this? So these are the recommendations that it gave this particular site. So this particular site, the recommendation was to defer off-screen images, resize and compress the images, serve them in next-gen formats, eliminate or async non-critical JS and CSS. So basically, don't load it initially for the user. Pre-connect to origins. That's just connecting to things that there's going to be an exterior call to upon the user requesting the site. Lazy load video thumbnails and iframes, and then lazy load ads obviously down the page, and then optimize for the visitor viewport, meaning what the visitor sees first is what you want to load first. And unfortunately, every single one of those things, if you do that, will make the average page load time longer. So doing exactly what Google wants you to do inside of these metrics, inside of these tools, in many cases will make your average page load time longer. So it's the point I want to make and emphasize here is that we are having to pick what metrics we want to optimize around, whether you're optimizing for a tool or any of Google's new web core vitals or average page load time. Ultimately, it's very difficult to kind of like find a balance there because Google is going to give you different information everywhere. But realistically, you want to optimize for the user. What is going to make the experience fast for the user? Google says that's what they care about. When you look at something like speed or even the web core vitals being used as a quote unquote ranking signal, it is a very, very small one. When Google talks about UX, they're primarily talking about the UX between the search results and the website itself, not necessarily how the website and the user are getting along. Realistically, Google says that's a tiebreaker. Two sites exactly the same. If one has something they perceive to be a slightly better user experience, that one could rank above the other. So we're going to talk about what specifically are they looking at today, and then how do you optimize around that. So one other caveat as we get started here, because I know a lot of people will focus on the fact that they're using Ezoic for monetization and ad serving. And one of the things I really want to emphasize here, because in many cases we have customers that are showing ads for the very first time. There's affiliate sites that have started displaying ads, or they were never measuring their site speed until they started using Ezoic. And they're like, well, hey, my website was really fast and now it's slow. Well, it depends. There are a couple things we'll look at here today to figure out if you've actually optimized your site properly and set Ezoic up so that it can be as fast as possible. But one of the things I will emphasize here is that all ads, no matter where they come from, no matter what you're using to display ads or serve ads on your site, ads make websites slower. This is a BBC article that talked about an analysis they did of the top 1 million websites on the web, and the number one thing slowing down sites in general was ads. So there is a trade-off that you're going to have displaying ads in almost every instance, and I'm going to show you the one exception later on. And then on top of that, I will share that this article itself, I ran it through PageSpeed Insights. It actually only had one ad on the page, and you can see I scored 15 on Google's PageSpeed Insights. So rather ironic in many cases. So to my point, there's always a trade. So if you have a website with no exterior JavaScript, nothing in your header, basically the Apple Reader version of a website, it's going to be very fast because there's nothing else being called out to load. If you're an Amazon affiliate site or something like that, you may not be loading those. It's not like you're loading an ad. You just have links or hyperlinks on your page. However, when you have an Amazon associate ad or box or something like that on your site or plug-in, those things have the ability to dilute the value of ads or other revenue on the page. And so there's a trade-off there. The point that I'm trying to make is that there's a trade-off every time you add something to your site, whether it's speed, whether it's revenue, whether it's the user experience. These things are all things you have to account for. And that's one of the reasons why we made Ezoic, was to allow people to provide each visitor with the optimal experience and honestly the most profitable experience as well if you're the publisher, and to be able to put those tools in your hands. So if you're using something like Google AdSense prior to using Ezoic, generally you've got one tag on the page with something like AdSense, and so it's going to be slightly faster than a more sophisticated ad setup with something you have like Ezoic, where you're going to have Google AdX, thousands of other ad networks and partners that are bidding, and then ads being served out of Google DFP or Google Ad Manager. And then you combine things like header bidding and all the other things that Ezoic does for you automatically to increase your revenue. And the requests and the timings are going to be slower. That's general. You go to any website that has a sophisticated setup, CNN.com, you pick your favorite website that's popular, it's going to be serving ads in the exact same way that Ezoic is serving ads for you, and that is generally going to be slightly slower. That being said, Ezoic is designed to make displaying ads faster. So if you're displaying ads prior to Ezoic, generally you should be in a situation where by having Ezoic enabled on your site properly, your site should be faster. Even with AdSense, in many instances, what we find for a couple of different reasons, and I'll go into that here in a moment. So in most cases, when set up correctly, a site will be faster with Ezoic. So we have a tool, if I can show it here. Nope. Actually, if you go, get out of here, site speed. We have a site speed tester, and what this will do is it'll actually look at your original version of your site. So if you integrate with Ezoic and you're like, my site was faster before, we can actually see that. So if you're using AdSense or something like that, we can figure out why that is, and then we can actually look at what you can kind of dig into it a little bit deeper. So you'll be able to see your original site, the size, the total requests. You can see this is one of my sites. You can see the page size is actually smaller with Ezoic. We're compressing a lot of this stuff down. I'll get into that in a minute with the name server integration. Total requests is down, time to interactive is faster, and then page fully loaded is faster as well. And generally, that's one of the things that we continue to find is that all the metrics that Google wants people to have, if you're serving ads before and you set up Ezoic correctly, you will have a much faster site, because there are a lot of things we build into our caching, our CDN, in our integration that should be able to make your site much more effective and faster in general. So let's get into that. How do you set up Ezoic to be fast? So the first thing that I'm going to walk us through is I'm going to go into the site that we were talking about earlier, Injury Health Blog. It's just a kind of a site that I created a long time ago, and like I said, we just sort of beat it up. Don't be too hard on it. And so I've logged in here to my Ezoic dashboard, and I'm going to go to speed. Actually, before we go to speed, I'm going to touch on, sorry about that. Before we go to speed, I'm going to go to the most important thing to get started with. So I'm on my dashboard. The very first thing is the integration method. So I can tell you right now, one of the #1 reasons why I see people have issues with page speed with Ezoic or have some kind of problem is they are WordPress plugin integrated. You want to find the fastest integration method. There's a bunch of different reasons why you want to try to avoid plugins for any kind of ad serving integration in general if you're concerned about speed. But ultimately, I'll kind of just delve mostly into this. So right now, there are 2 integration methods that I will recommend if you want to maximize your speed with Ezoic. The #1 is name servers integration. It's very, very simple and very easy. So if you are WordPress plugin integrated right now, I highly recommend going name server integrated. You will remain integrated with the WordPress plugin until name server integration is complete. So you can go and change your name servers at your registrar or host. And then once the name servers are propagated, you can deactivate the plugin and things like that, and you'll be fully integrated. The other option that you have is if you are set up on Cloudflare as your CDN, you will have the option for Cloudflare integration, and it is very easy. It'll be one click, and you'll be Cloudflare integrated like that. If you are like, I don't want to do name servers, Cloudflare is seems easier to me. It's pretty simple. You can go to cloudflare.com, and then you can sign up for a free Cloudflare account. It's very easy. It's going to ask you for your email. It's going to have you create an account. And as soon as you do, you put your site in, it'll have you change your name servers at your registrar. And then once name server or your site is integrated with Cloudflare, when you come to integration, here in the settings, Ezoic will automatically detect that and give you the Cloudflare option here. So Cloudflare or name server integration are what we recommend. If you're unfamiliar with name server integration, it's pretty simple. Your current name servers will be displayed here. It'll be at your registrar or host. So good example is if your registrar or host is Bluehost, it'll probably say something like cherry.bluehost and blueberry.bluehost.com. And then you'll just have to log in, find where you can change your name servers or DNS settings at your host. We've got a bunch of videos available on our YouTube channel where you can find out how to do this at a number of different hosts. At support.ezoic.com, we have a bunch of support articles on how to do this at tons of different hosts and registrars. And all you have to do is change your name servers here. And then after that, click integration completed. And it'll usually take about 12 hours or so for name servers to propagate across the web. And at that point, you'll be name server integrated. So that is step one, name server integration. Because without name server or Cloudflare integration, both are equally as good. You won't have access to the next part, which is we're going to go into the speed tab here, and I'm going to scroll down, and I'm going to find caching. So whether you're using the site speed accelerator or not, or have it on in any capacity, we're going to go ahead and go down to caching, and I'm going to go to caching app. So this is only available and only accessible to sites that are integrated via name servers or via Cloudflare. So if you're WordPress integrated, you're not going to be able to use these features until you are name server Cloudflare integrated, and it gives you access to our super, super fast CDN. So whether you're using Cloudflare already as a CDN or you have a CDN through your host, Ezoic CDN is very, very fast, and it's specifically designed for sites displaying ads. It also has some machine learning built in to understand how visitors come to your site and view your content so that it can cache it properly. I'm getting one question here from someone that raised their hand. Let's see. I don't see a question in the box right now, so I'm going to keep going, but I'm going to address a couple things here. So the first is, and I mentioned this on Thursday a little bit, people often say, well, I already have caching plugins installed on my WordPress website, or I already have caching enabled on my site via cache control headers or something like that. That's great. In most cases, those are completely different things. There are two types of caching that most sites are unfamiliar with being even remotely different. So browser caching and then the kind of caching that occurs at the CDN level, those are completely different. So for those that are unfamiliar, yeah, I'm sure Google can help me out here. Always good charts of this. Here we go. That's more complicated than what I would like. Here we go. So in this case, sorry for the small screen here. Let's see if I can't make it bigger. No, I really can't. No, not today. All right, so what you can see here is a map of the world. Here is the origin server, the host server, and what a CDN does is it basically takes the website where it's hosted and places it in remote servers around the globe that it has basically a mirror version. So when a user actually needs to access the site, rather than making a call from Argentina or wherever, and making a call all the way back to the origin server, which looks like it might be in maybe Montana or North Dakota here, it can just call this server here in South America, which is much closer, and allow them access the site from there. And when you clear or purge the CDN cache, you basically ask for those servers to come get the most recent copy. Browser caching is different. Browser caching occurs at the device level of the user. So those are two different things. And oftentimes people think, well, I have caching, so that's good enough, right? In our case, it's not. And I want to make sure that I help everyone here get set up with the proper form of Ezoic caching. So the very first thing you want to do is become Cloudflare name server integrated, and then come in here and turn caching on. So you're going to enable CDN services. This will enable caching for across your entire site, and it'll allow Ezoic to operate as your CDN. So there's a number of support articles on this if you're concerned about how long your content is cached. Largely, the advice that I give is if most of your articles don't change on a daily basis, meaning the content is not changing, you're not going in and updating them, this is something that you need to have enabled, and you're largely not going to need to clear the cache very often. However, if you're ever in an instance where you're updating certain articles or pieces of content, you can clear the cache by URL, or you can clear the cache for the whole site. So certain updates or changes to articles, you may want the information to be updated right away and make sure users across the world are getting that version. You can go in and you can clear the caches directly here. Now, the other thing that I brought up, and this was in the last one, and I know we've got a question from Brian here about this already. The thing that I'll point out here is specific to the cache control headers here. So one of the things that we will often tell people to do is to override cache control headers. And so what are those, and do I need to do this? So inside of big data analytics, so if you go to analytics here, so this is probably the third most important thing. So outside of being name server integrated and turning on the caching, you need to make sure it's working. Every website is a little bit different, and because of different plugins and technologies and the way that your site was developed, we need to make sure that your site is actually getting the benefits that we hope that it is from this technology. So if you go into big data analytics, you can scroll down to site speed, and when you click on site speed, you're going to find an area called caching, and then Ezoic caching. So in Ezoic caching, you're going to see Ezoic cache level here, and you're going to get three usually options, and it's going to say cache hit, cache miss, and then cache off. So for me, I've got this date range right here. So one of the questions from Brian was he actually did one of our recommendations here for when the cache hit, cache miss, cache off. If you look here and you see a large percentage of your traffic is resulting in cache miss, that means those pages, those sessions are not getting the benefit of the caching app. And generally what we find is when this is a major problem for speed is that this will be in the 80 or 90%. And that's because you have a plugin or something like that that is causing Ezoic's cache to be overridden. Ezoic will always obey your rules generally upon integration, because we don't want to cause anything specifically you have set up on your site to be broken or not work the way it's supposed to. That being said, if you go in and you find that the cache is missing a lot, so this percentage is very high. So 38 is still fairly high, but there's another reason for that sometimes too. So depending on when you do this, if I'm looking at a date range that includes before I've made any changes or fixes to this, Ezoic is still going to show that during that time period, my page views or my sessions still have those cache misses. So if I updated this yesterday, let's say, I'm looking at a date range that includes May 31st. So of course this isn't going to change because I'm still looking at a date before I'd fixed it. So if I fixed it yesterday, I may only want to look at, let's say, today. And I'm running this report the first time, same time I'm running the Zoom call, so you have to give me a second. But there are two major reasons why you'll generally find that you're seeing cache misses. So you see here cache hit, 60%, cache miss, 39%. So I've got the same number where it's the majority of the time I'm getting cache hit, but I'm still getting cache miss. At least I'm not getting cache off anymore. So cache off is when you're seeing a lot and you're like, I definitely have it on now, you may have a problem with your date range. Same thing for cache miss if you're looking at a date range prior to any changes that you've made. So that being said, the first thing that I recommend is if your site falls into the category that I mentioned earlier, where you're not regularly updating most of the pages on your website, I would recommend going into update cache setting values. And I would go to cache control headers override and mark as true. So all this does is on your website, you have what's called cache control headers that are usually being set by a plugin or some other service or technology like your host. And it is causing your site to cache in a way that's probably not the best for site speed or for your users. Generally, a lot of these plugins by default don't want to set a low cache control header because they want to give you control and they don't want to make anybody feel like their content isn't getting updated correctly. And so they'll set a really long cache header, and that basically nullifies any benefit that Ezoic provides. So in this case, we're going to just override that. And I also have some more recommendations on the plugins and things like that if you're a WordPress site here in a minute. You can also force the caching by device type if that is not set to true, and that can often be the cause of the cache hit versus cache miss as well. What we'll find is oftentimes it is the mobile or desktop traffic that is largely the one that is experiencing the issues with the caching, and it's because oftentimes there are weird plugins where somewhere in the settings there's something where it's like, would you like us to use browser caching on the mobile version or only use browser caching on the mobile version? There's all kinds of weird ones that are out there, and that's why plugins are, you're going to see in a minute, one of my recommendations is to try to use this as few as possible. You can also use caching for cookies. So if you have a lot of return visitors or something along those lines, one of the things you can do is you can set this to true as well. And oftentimes that can play a role too, especially if the majority of your site visitors are returning. Sometimes having to call or having visitors come back on different devices or things like that when the IP is shared, enabling the caching for cookies as true is also something that can offer a benefit as well. And that's it. Generally, the other thing that I'll share here, this is just something that I saw, if you have a plugin or you have a rule on your site that says no cache, that is something we take pretty seriously, because oftentimes that's something that a forum or a site where most of the articles are generally not updated regularly, every now and then, like a news site will be publishing new stuff almost hourly, or there'll be new comments on articles really regularly, and they'll set a no cache policy for those pages. Ezoic will learn how users behave on your site over time and will adapt our caching to that. However, if you're like, I'm not running a forum, most of my articles are not being updated in a way to where I don't need a cache policy to be completely absent, you could also set this as true if you're still having issues with cache hit, cache miss, and most of your content is not being regularly updated. And you can exclude pages as well. So you could exclude like your home page or something like that if you wanted to ensure that, you know, if you publish a new article there on several times a day or something like that, that those are being updated. And you can set rules by page here as well too. So I'm going to go ahead and click update, and I'm going to go back to my caching app. So this is where I was talking about excluded rules. Let's say for my home page, I'm writing new content almost daily. So I want to say I want to maybe exclude, always exclude, maybe yes, maybe no. So I'm going to target a single page. You can also target a directory. A directory might be something like /blog/ article name. So if I wanted to make sure that any article that included the /blog portion of my site didn't get cached, I could exclude that directory here. I could say if there's a particular URL parameter, meaning like if there's like a question mark, or it's like I have an affiliate relationship or something along those lines, I maybe don't want those to be cached for some reason. or a particular cookie, which is going to get a little bit more complex there. So I'm guessing if you're cooking users and you're setting your cache policies based on that, you probably have a pretty good idea of how to manage this. So that's how you can kind of set some of this material up and how you can optimize around the cache policy here. Now, the other thing that I will mention is that there are a lot of WordPress plugins out there. And WordPress plugins, while greatly beneficial, and trust me, all my websites are WordPress, so I feel you. Unfortunately, there are a lot of plugins like Auto Optimize, Lightspeed Cache, W3 Total Cache, WP Fastest Cache, WP Rocket, and a lot of these are designed around caching. And so if you're going to be using Ezoic caching, one of the things you'll want to do is make sure that you're not overriding Ezoic cache settings or having one of these plugins basically work against itself. I recommend in most cases disabling most of these plugins. And if you don't disable them, I recommend turning off most of the caching features if you're using the Ezoic caching app. And the reason for that is because oftentimes when you cache something with a plugin, it makes it either impossible for Ezoic to cache it, or Ezoic is having to make an extra call to cache it again, and that is leading to longer load time. So if somebody's like, wow, Ezoic is making my site so much slower than it was before, and you displayed ads using something else or something along those lines, it's oftentimes these plugins that are causing a conflict. I'm going to kind of talk a little bit more about these here in a moment. So this is just a quick recap. If you're setting up Ezoic to be as fast as possible, you want to be name server Cloudflare integrated. Here's where you can get to that. Oops. And again, these slides will be available to everybody in the same place where you can access all of our future classes and recordings, ezoic.com/ezoic-education. Then you want to go to the speed tab, enable caching, see the dynamic there. And then you want to make sure that caching is working properly. And if you actually click on that link, you'll be able to see precisely that report. So if you're logged into Ezoic and you click this link on this presentation, it'll take you directly to that report in case you can't remember how to get there. And then troubleshooting. Override the cache control headers in the settings. You can look at some of the other settings in there as well and set those to true if you think that they're potentially keeping your site from caching the content. And then you can disable the caching features in popular plugins if you're using WordPress, or remove cache control settings from your host. Oftentimes, some hosts rarely will have cache settings at the host level, but not most of the time. So a couple other I would say just tips for making sites faster in general. Have one big one, but I'll start here. So plugins, as great as they are, most sites operate with quite a few. I think on average, sites have 27 now, WordPress sites or something like that. It's a lot. And all of these are adding features, functions, code to your website. Sometimes it's not user-facing, but oftentimes it is. And what we're finding more and more is that these plugins that were designed to make sites faster, as Google has changed, and as some of the goalposts have been moved, many of these site speed plugins are actually making sites quite a bit slower, or they make them incrementally faster, but create a problem to which they can never be faster because of some of the features and the material that they've enabled. So one of the things that I do recommend is going through your plugins and disabling or deactivating anything you know that is not in being actively used or something is required. Oftentimes plugins have duplicate features. So if you've got a caching plugin and some kind of site speed plugin like Auto Optimize, you'll find that many times they have like duplicate features. So it's best to consolidate into one. And I know that most of these have some paid element to them. The one that I'm going to show you next is basically how you can manage plugins where you might need it for one thing or one page. Maybe you've got a contact form plugin, but you're like, I only have one page with a contact form on it, so I need it, but I don't need to load that code on every page. One of the plugins that I like for this is called Asset Cleanup. So asset cleanup will allow you to basically look at all your plugins, and you can basically say, I want to disable that plugin, but only on this page, or maybe on the whole website, or only on pages with this matching URL. And this will allow you to essentially, if you have a website where you have a contact form and on every page you're loading, the Ninja form or something like that, it makes it to where only on your contact pages you have to load the Ninja form. And this is a pretty good plugin. There are some more custom features to it that are paid. And so it is a catch-22 to where if you want to take advantage of the fact that plugins are slowing down websites and you want to make it faster, you may have to pay for the granular control that this one in particular provides. I found it to be helpful. I will say this though, it's most of the CSS and JavaScript features around caching and minification. I recommend making sure that those are off with Ezoic, because they can cause, again, it might make it incrementally faster briefly, but it will take away Ezoic's ability to do a lot of other things that will make your site faster. So I would say generally the only thing I would use this tool for is basically deactivating plugins on certain pages, or only loading plugins on the pages that you need them. Which leads me to my last, probably the last thing that I'll mention here. And I've got some tips in here as well. So like those of you that come back and watch the presentation, there's some visuals to kind of remind you. So this is actually my site. Remember, it was the 31 before. Just after turning on the caching, even with 60% missing, or 38% missing and 60-something% getting the hit, you can see my site's quite a bit faster here already. And so, yeah, the question a lot of times is like, why not use these plugins? I feel like I got into that a little bit here. I'm sure I'll get some more questions about it. Talked about this a little bit. The other thing that I'll mention too, and I think this is a really good one to go and look at, it's how are your users affected by all of these changes? So one of the things that I'm a big fan of is anytime you do anything that impacts speed, I highly recommend going into big data analytics and actually seeing what was the impact of this. So I really like looking at things like connection type. See how fast this will load. Things like connection type inside of big data analytics will tell you basically what types of connections are the majority of your users on. So a good example of this is, are my users largely using a 4G, a 3G, a 2G, a slow 2G connection? So oftentimes when you're looking at your site loading slow in mobile, Google is telling you it loads slow for 2G users. Well, that's fine. Let me see how many of my users are 2G. Well, 1% use 2G, 0.7% are slow 2G, and 23% are 3G, but 74% are 4G. So 74% of my mobile visitors are getting the site very fast via 4G connection. And not only that, if I look at my average engage time and my bounce rate and average engage time is really not affected by the connection type. So my user experience is largely unimpacted by, even when my visitors have a slow connection. And the thing that's ironic about this is that you can tell my content is good because the visitors here, it's probably not that they're more engaged because they're on a slow connection. It might actually take them longer to load it, but truthfully, they're waiting for it. And that's one of the really important things here to understand, is that you want to optimize for your users. And when Google or tools are looking at a lot of this information, they are looking specifically at everything. They're taking a very broad brush approach to looking at your website. They're treating your website like everybody else's website. And realistically, what we want to be able to do is optimize for our user experiences. That is what Google is going to be trying to measure the best, to be able to understand whether or not one search result is better than the other. Is the user getting the content that they want and having a good experience? And so that is what you should be optimizing for as well. If we go back, you can also see what types of connections, so cellular, cable, DSL, corporate. You can see that here for I only have one date range selected. Maybe we could try, I clicked on frameworks, probably would have been better to go to connection effective type. So you can see about 70% of my traffic is mobile. I'd say that's fairly common too these days. We're seeing about 60 to 70% of web traffic be mobile. So of that mobile traffic here, we can see that unknown 40, 44. Those are probably my largely desktop users, but all my mobile visitors are 4G, and so you can see here how does the unknown connection differ from my mobile 4G. You can see here that the bounce rate is higher for my 4G. The average engagement time is lower. Engage time, my guess is that's going to match up in general with my mobile stats. You can also look at things like browser and OS, and you can look at that's a 70% mobile. Yeah, that lines up pretty good. You can see the same with bounce rate and engage time is really close to what we're seeing on my 4G connection. So you can see that the fast and slow connection is largely not affecting my visitors here. You can also go in and you can look at things like request timings here under site speed, and then also look at your slowest pages and figure out, are there certain pages where maybe you do have that cache setting to where it's ignoring it, and rather than set it true or false, maybe you want to go in and change it by page. So I don't have a slowest page here on my 1 day. So on the site we were just looking at, 84% of the visitors were mobile, 74% of the visitors were already on fast 4G. That's 63% of the visitors, and the remaining 16% of desktop visitors all have a fast connection via the way that they're connected via desktop, cable, DSL, you name it. And that means that 79% of the website have a fast version of the site to begin with. So to be able to try to judge my user experience based on what the slowest possible user is seeing for speed is not probably the best way to approach something like speed or website performance or UX. So you can see here, this is a site that is using the Ezoic version. So this is actually the site we were looking at. This was a site that was concerned that their site was slow. So 80% of their visitors, this is loading it in Lighthouse with a 4G fast mobile connection. You can see it gets a 100 out of 100 mobile speed score. So 100 out of 100 when you load it on a fast connection. So that is exactly what it is getting here. So all those users there in that 74% are seeing a 100 out of 100. Now, if you run it and you give it the simulated slow like it does by default, you're going to see, I don't know, like a 60 or who knows, something probably kind of crappy. But realistically, the majority of visitors are getting a 100 out of 100 experience here. And then we loaded the non-Ezoic version here, and the non-Ezoic version was a 48 on the same fast connection. So like I said, in most cases, when you're displaying ads prior to using Ezoic, when we've done all the things that we just talked about, all the optimizations, integration types, you are going to see the site be faster. And particularly if you hone in on the user experience by looking at who are your visitors and then load the site in the Lighthouse by simulating that experience, you're going to find that you're probably scoring in the greens 80, 90, 100 using Ezoic. And this is something I made available once before, but I'll continue to have it in the slides here. And these are just different known WP plugin conflicts. And so I recommend using maybe one of these instead. All the caveats of don't use any of the caching functions still apply, but these are the ones that we know that we can work with versus some of the ones above have known conflicts and actually make these slower by default. And many of these, like I said, are paid. And so one of the questions I always get, and it's a fair criticism, people will say, Ezoic is slowing my site down, and then they're trying to charge me for a tool to speed it up. Well, realistically, all ads slow sites down. So if your site wasn't displaying ads before, and now it is, that's just that's an unfortunate part of the web, and there's always trade-offs. Now, I just went through, if you optimize everything properly, Ezoic should make all sites faster by default if you were displaying ads before. And if you follow all of those things, we should be able to provide that. Now, you will not find a website on the internet that's not a AMP page, which is Google not even showing your website on your website. It's showing it on Google. That's why it has a Google URL. But the Site Speed Accelerator is a paid tool that we offer. You can try it for 7 days for free. If you are if you think that site speed is the one thing that's holding back your rankings, like give it a try. Like that's the whole point of like making it a paid tool is it's a fair amount of processing power, and there's a lot of other things like the way that we compress images, serve things out of the cache, serve images in next-gen formats. All these things are plugins that people pay for today from WordPress, or services or tools or software that people pay for. And we want to offer it to our customers, but we didn't want to subsidize the cost to them if it wasn't worth it. And in many cases, as you can see, we think the sites are plenty faster users. The average site speed, mobile site speed score of a #1 result in Google, looking at 1 million websites, is 40. So if you think that, you know, a slow site speed score is the reason why you're not killing the rankings, I hate to tell you, it's just not. And the thing is, the Site Speed Accelerator gives you the ability to test that with the trial. But rather than paying for a bunch of plugins that conflict with each other and always break, the Site Speed Accelerator is a single tool that you can use all in one place. And I'm gonna shoot through really fast how to set it up with a couple of troubleshooting tips, just so if you want to try the trial or you're using it now, you can get the most out of it. I don't actually want to pitch it to everybody because that's not the goal of this. Realistically, the thing is if you're going to pay for something to make your site fast, this is the only thing on the internet that will make your website fast with ads. Go look at any website loading ads. Outside of just not loading ads on the first page view, which is a trick. I think it's cute that a lot of ad op shops will try to not load ads on the first page view is a way of tricking site speed tools. But realistically, what you want to be able to do is serve ads to users in a way that actually is fast. And Site Speed Accelerator will do that. You'll get an 80+ score if you're name server or Cloudflare integrated, and that's guaranteed with the tool. So you want to turn it on. So I'm going to kind of just walk you through this. You go into speed. You'll first have to enable the tool, so then you can enable it by desktop, mobile, tablet. And then the very first thing you're going to want to do is create a version. Recommended is always where I'll tell someone to start. I wouldn't go into experimental or custom unless you know exactly what you're doing. Conservative is good. It's a good place to start if maybe you have trouble with the recommended when you preview your site. I have to get into it in a minute, but I recommend the recommended setting. I click next and then click save. And it will not be active, so it's not working. And not only that, the preview is going to take a little bit of time to actually generate. So if you're like, my site's not faster, and you just click activate, it's not done yet. So give it a little bit of time. The preview is actually meant so that you can actually see your website the way it should look. Everything should work the way it should when you use the preview. And when you use the preview, you can actually put that URL into a page speed tool, and it'll give you the actual measurement. So don't ever put it to active until you know it's working. So I click on preview. So look, it tells me a site speed preview for this page is in the process of being created. Now, I've already done this. I've got my page speed preview done on a recommended setting version that I'd created earlier. And so I'll see this green dot here, and it's going to tell me all the preview features that I have enabled here. So it's telling me my features. And you can see I've got this URL up here that's in my preview URL, and my site's showing ads. My images are all showing. I can click around on my site. Everything appears to be working. So I'm just going to go ahead and take that URL. Go back now. And I'm going to throw that into PageSpeed Insights. And without ever activating it, you can see that the site speed preview here, I'm getting a 92. The only thing that I'm a little bit yellow on here is my largest contentful paint. And over time, Ezoic will actually get really good at optimizing around that. So you can see all my stats, my time to interactive, total blocking time, cumulative layout shift, all that stuff, really, really good here. That's the stuff that's showing in Search Console. If you're like, it shows good in PageSpeed Insights, but Search Console still shows it is slow. Remember, going back to the beginning, they're using Crux data, which is taking the average of the last 30 days. So it will change. You just have to give Google 30 days to average it out. I don't know why they decided to do that, but this is your first line of defense. You just want to make sure that you've got these mostly in the green here. And if you set everything up the way that I've just shown you, along with the site speed accelerator, that should be the case. So the other things that I will add here is troubleshooting with the site speed accelerator is oftentimes a post thumbnail might not display on a home page. So you can exclude the post thumbnail under the script delay and images. So if you ever want to go into your active version or the draft version of your site speed version, you can go in and you can click on edit. When you go to images here, you can go to URL rules, and you could say, I just don't want to run the lazy loading images on my homepage, or I don't want to run it on the thumbnail directory. So if you're a WordPress site, this is the directory that your thumbnails are in, and I've seen it conflict on some themes, so you may want to say run on all URLs except post thumbnail. Click back, and then you would want to do this for lazy loading, next gen, and resizing. So you can go in and you can add that to each of these, and then click save. That's a common one that we'll see. You can also turn off lazy load-in plugin features on any of your plugins. This will often mess up your site speed score. So WP Rocket, W3 Cache, I just turned them off. I actually really like WP Rocket if you're not serving ads or just generally trying to optimize your site. But what we find is with the site speed accelerator in place, you're better off just disabling it, to be honest. Unless you're using it for some other forms or features, I recommend disabling those. But if not completely disabling, definitely disable all the caching and lazy loading features. And then, so these are, so this is specific to one group that we work with quite a bit, Project 24, but it applies to most sites, and that is turning off things like short pixel, any type of image resizers, any caching plugins, turning all that stuff off once you actually have the site speed accelerator preview version on your site. It's worth deactivating those just so that you can ensure that Ezoic is working properly, because oftentimes those things, specifically auto-optimize is the worst. They actually cache your content on their URLs, things like your images, and so Ezoic can't actually even cache them or serve them properly in next-gen formats because they're actually hosting them on autooptimize.com someplace. It's really terrible. And then you can actually exclude pages. So if you ever are using Site Speed Accelerator and you're like, I just got this one page, it doesn't look right, you can exclude it. You just have to go into Site Speed Accelerator, exclude pages. You can see I've got a excluded page here. You just add one, and you can put the URL, the directory, or even a rejection. And then the very last one is every now and then we'll get asked about revenue. Does making your site uber fast affect the revenue? There are always trade-offs, so some sites could be affected. So if you turn all these features on and you notice that your revenue is impacted in a way that you're like, it's not a fair trade for me, I'm willing for my site to be slower potentially, you can turn off one of the two features that are most likely to impact it are ad delay and script delay. But I would start with ad delay. So if you are concerned about revenue from a standpoint of you see it go down to a degree that you're concerned, you can go in once again and edit your version, and you can go over to script execution, and you can see ad delay here is requires the paid version, but I have the ad delay turned off. So if you actually don't have the subscription version of Ezoic, and you've been using Ezoic for a long time where you had access to our previous site speed tools, some of these tools in here are still available to you. So things like minifying HTML and things like that, if you are getting rid of a caching app or something like that, these are still free to use, and I highly recommend it because it is something that can make your site faster and you don't need to use excess plugins for. And that's largely it. I will get to your questions now. I want to just a couple of housekeeping items here because I know we went to full time, and I will answer questions for as long as I can. If you want to attend or watch recordings of the upcoming courses, they're on our YouTube channel. We have a special playlist for these. We also have a lot of other really great resources on our YouTube channel. We have a series called Ezoic Explained, where we go into just things non-Ezoic related, just trying to teach people how to do things related to traffic, revenue, content. And then we have Ezoic Academy, which is our how-to tutorials, how to do different things inside of Ezoic, many of the things maybe we talked about today. And then Publisher Spotlight is a series in which we interview different publishers that are using Ezoic or experts in the space and try to get their tips and strategies that may be helpful for you. I mentioned my podcast in the beginning. We have a podcast where we talk about the latest news. So if you're always trying to stay up to date on whatever it is that Google is doing or just the industry publishing, the coronavirus and its impact on everything that we do, we talk about it each week on the podcast. It's available wherever you get your podcasts. And then our blog. So our blog, anytime something major happens or there's something that's complicated, we try to approach it from a completely objective standpoint. It's not a place where we're trying to pitch or sell Ezoic products or anything like that. It's really based on education. So you can access this recording, these slides, and all these resources at ezoic.com/education-education or ezoic-education-courses. So hopefully that's been helpful. And now I will start to dig into questions, which it looks like I've got quite a few. So I will do my best. I know for the last one, we had a lot of questions and I didn't get to them all. So if for whatever reason I'm unable to answer your question or we can't get to it immediately, we will have some kind of either recording or ability for you to be able to go and see the questions that were answered and be able to access them yourself. We won't go from not answering your question. I may even send you someplace else to get the answer if it's fairly complicated. Hopefully I can answer it. So let's start here at the top. I think I answered Brian's question about the cache control headers. But Brian, if you still have questions about that, let me know if there's something specific. Otherwise, you can email me at tylerbishop@ezoic.com, TYLER Bishop, all one thing, @ezoic.com, and I'd be happy to connect you with somebody that can maybe look at it deeper. Rebecca asked suggestions for using WP Rocket with name server integration with Ezoic. So I think I covered that as well. Generally, my advice is once you've enabled all the caching features to turn off the majority of caching features associated with WP Rocket. But if you turn on the site speed accelerator, even just using features that may be available to you for free, to probably supplant that plugin. But you could test it. You could test and see if your site if you're happier with the user experience, with the speed before and after. Like I said, I really like looking at those reports and big data analytics to figure out, is my user having a better experience with this version or that version of the site? And sometimes that can be really, really helpful. But yeah, just generally, I would say that the biggest thing is all those caching plugins, once you do everything that we talked about in this, they're in many cases unneeded. And the reason why we, don't shove name server Cloudflare integration down everyone's throat and, disable the plugins or disable the functionality is we don't want to make the judgment of that's not something essential or there's something in your site that's set up specific to that. So, the number one rule is we want to do no harm. And so that's one of the reasons why we're trying to do these courses is to give people better information about how to set up Ezoic and then really how to understand how their users are enjoying the site or using the site and that sort of thing. Didn't I get what you said about if we have Cloudflare before we join Ezoic, are we able to keep our own or do we move over to Ezoic CDN? So Ezoic is a Cloudflare partner. So if you're using Cloudflare CDN, that doesn't change any of the advice that I've given. Everything is exactly the same. It's the same as name server integration. You need to enable Ezoic caching, Ezoic CDN. There are a lot of aspects of that we then we add on top of the Cloudflare network and everything that Cloudflare is doing. We add additional stuff, and then all those additional controls that I talked about being able to override cache control headers, and then also just optimizing the content on your website. You need that enabled. So if you are Cloudflare integrated, make sure you have caching turned on. If you're getting a lot of cache miss inside of big data analytics, you want to make sure that you maybe override cache control headers or disable any of the plugins that may be causing that issue. Tyler, is what you're showing is only available when you opt into Ezoic's own site speed app? No. So almost everything that I showed you prior to the site speed accelerator, where I set the setting to recommendation, all that is available with Ezoic for free with the name server integration and caching. All that stuff is material that people pay for. People pay for access to a CDN. They pay for all the advanced caching features that we provide. All this is material that we provide for our publishers for free. Helen said, I deactivated SiteGround's cache plugin, and what a difference when it comes to serving the ads. Way faster without SiteGround. Great, that's really helpful feedback for us. Generally, that's what we keep finding is I'm a member of so many different publishing communities, and it's really hard for me personally to go in and see someone say, well, I like Ezoic, but it slows my site down, and then to see them, you know, talk about using AdSense or outsourcing, because the truth is with Ezoic you can be so much faster than what you can be without Ezoic, but many times there's just conflicts at the host level or the plugin level. There's just so many, it's very hard to get in front of. And I can tell you personally that this has been a Manhattan project of sorts internally to be able to serve people very specifically information like this, like you mentioned, like turning off the SiteGround caching helped you, Helen, that we want to be able to give people these recommendations right up front and say, we detected that you're a SiteGround site, and we believe that these, you know, these setting changes could allow you to serve your site faster. So glad to hear it. Thanks for sharing. Susan said, what I meant by that was when you pay for the site speed app / upgrade. So many of the features here, so I can share my screen here again. So when you go in and you turn on the Ezoic Site Speed Accelerator, you will need a subscription to use any new features. However, many of our users have had access to this tool for a long time, and so many of those features are available for free. So you can probably see this site actually doesn't have the paid version enabled, and so things like the efficient static cache policy, some of the image features here, all of these I believe are subscription. Minifying HTML, a lot of these are, but minifying it is not. So there are for many of our users that especially have been using Ezoic for a long time, these are still free. So I recommend going in and activating this and seeing if seeing what tools and features are available to you. Rebecca, is it worth it to just disable WP Rocket completely? I mean, my answer to that is, so to give you the site that I'm working on right now that we use as an example had WP Rocket and I turned it off. Ezoic.com uses our site speed accelerator and is integrated through Ezoic. I used to use WP Rocket and now I don't. It's faster, has fewer conflicts. I think it's better. I recommend you test that. So you can disable the plugin and run it for a day or two or something like that. And then you can look at timings, you can look at speed reports, you can look at your actual user experience inside of big data analytics. You can also enable, after it's disabled, you can clear your cache. I'd give it maybe an hour or so, and then you can create a new site speed accelerator version, and you can test that preview URL, and that might be a really, really good way to go about testing to see if it's actually faster in page speed tools. So generally I find yes, but I'm a big proponent of kind of testing and things like that, as we all are here at Ezoic. As you probably imagine, is a company that built the first machine learning platform designed to test just about everything. So that looks like it's about it for the questions. So excellent. I hope that was helpful. So if you had to go and you didn't get to see the whole thing, hopefully now you've seen the whole thing. If you are curious, I see a question about my email. I'll type it into the chat. It's Tyler Bishop at Ezoic.com. I am not a support person, so if you email me with a support question, I'm going to probably take it to a support person, hate to tell you, because it's just, I'm not the best person for that. I see the question is about EPMB. So I just did a webinar on Thursday about EPMB optimization, so I recommend checking out that because it's probably the first place to start. It's also probably good to look at something like the ad revenue index. If you go to ad revenue index, Ezoic.com. You can see global ad rates. You can see how those were impacted by the coronavirus and how those started being impacted in March and how we're seeing a recovery now. However, if you have EPMB that's declining for some reason outside of seasonality, I recommend looking closely at your traffic. Most of the time it's traffic related, but if it's not traffic related, oftentimes it could be a plugin or some kind of conflict or something else that you have set up. But generally, if there's something wrong with the site configuration that wasn't wrong before, it's usually self-inflicted, meaning there's something that you've enabled on Ezoic or on your website that could be causing an issue. A lot of times it is caching related. So that'd be where I point you. So if you're happy to email me, but like I said, that question, I'm probably going to take you to support to look into your question. All right, that's it. Thanks, everybody.